Hey, Dr. B, it's Laura Miller again, and let's go ahead and move on to part two. These questions are a little more specific, so I'm going to try to get through them. What is your overall response to the role propaganda plays in shaping perspective about people from other cultures? I think it plays a huge role, especially when your actual real time, down on the ground exposure to people from other cultures is somewhat limited. So the information you get um, does a lot to shape your perceptions and your ideas about people from other cultures. And we live in an information age, it's a media age. And there's really good things about that because there's all sorts of different kind of perspectives out there. But the pervasive perception right now in terms of like the topic for this Dropbox immigration is that it's like these people are bad and they're coming to harm us and they're going to compromise our national security and it's not just the folks coming up from South America when Trump imposed travel bans on countries that are primarily Muslim. Like all of this stuff is propaganda, and it very strongly shapes perspective about people from other cultures. But the contingency is when people have a limited access to people from other cultures. That's when propaganda can do its I guess quote unquote best work, which is terrible work. Do you see evidence of ethnic focused propaganda today? And I mean, anybody who is informed and anybody who is conscious knows that yes, there is tons of evidence of ethnic focused propaganda in our country today for sure. Question 2, in segment 17 of Propaganda Wars, the narrative of the U.S. government documentary closes with these words: are we setting a standard for the treatment of people who may have loyalties to an enemy nation? We are protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency. My reaction to that statement is that it is a part of a propaganda piece. So anytime we are protecting ourselves, there are two key phrases here. There's the we and ourselves. So that goes kind of counter to the whole concept of trusting God to protect you in your circumstances. I am not a, God helps those who help themselves type of person. I think a lot of people have circumstances that are way beyond their control, and not everybody can help themselves. So I think that inherently, because it's in a propaganda piece, that to say, well, we're protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency is a way of telling people, it's because people have in mind this idea, like, what are we supposed to do as Christians to address this issue of, the Japanese among us? And the government's coming answering that question because the government has already decided how to go about dealing with that question. So it is propaganda. Well, we're going to go ahead and do this, but this doesn't violate any principles of Christian decency because we're telling you that now. Like, we're telling you that, so it is right. So I think it's ridiculous and it's propaganda. Question 3, what are the reactions to the overall message conveyed by the U.S. government through its exploration of forcing Japanese Americans into internment camps? It's a fear-based move. It's not really any different than putting the Jews into the ghetto in Warsaw or all through Europe, which is what obviously what the Nazis did. It's a separating in us and them. And it's anything that comes from a place of fear is not coming from a place, and I'm not talking about holy fear of God, I'm talking about fear, human level fear. Any actions coming out of that place are not coming out of a place of love. Fear and love don't coexist in that same space in that way. And I just thought it was tragic. And when I was watching, and I really thought that the propaganda, like I said earlier, I had some trouble with that resource, like just technology wise. But I really am interested in propaganda and psychological tactics like that. I think that they're used like in lots of ways not just in sort of ways, protectionist ways like this, but propaganda is used like to try to instill positive things in people. I mean, propaganda is not always negative. In this case, I just thought it was a tragedy and a real mirror of some of the dynamics that were happening in Europe at the same time to our Jewish brothers and sisters over there. And I don't know, the reaction to the overall message conveyed is just I don't know. Just justifying a really unjustifiable thing, but that's what propaganda does. What are your reactions to hearing about the same historical event, Jefferson internment camp from George Takei? And I'm pretty familiar with his story, and I've watched his TED Talks on that story. And what I think that really does is bring a human experience into this sort of historical event. And I was going somewhere yesterday, and it's been like recently was the anniversary of Kristallnacht, and the NPR was doing a retrospective on that and interviewing people and about that, and like what few surviving people there are who experienced that and experienced time in Europe when all that was going on. And they told this story about they're I guess it was somewhere here in Indiana. They're making this like museum, and they had found some dolls that some American soldiers, when they were liberating the camps, the concentration camps, they found these dolls that the American soldiers had given to some of the children that they were saving from that terrible, evil those places. And they're having them in this museum, so they're archiving that. And George Takei's talk on this has a similar effect of placing that in time, like taking that event that we can look at in a history book and say, what happened? I don't know, my thing just went away. Look at it in a history book and say, that was a really terrible thing that happened, or that was whatever that happened, or we can anesthetize it. But when you have a real life story like Takei's as a little child and going through that and processing through that as an adult, has that a similar effect to those dolls being placed in that museum. It just really takes that thing and just places it right on the timeline and intensely personalizes it. If you were to engage in some type of ongoing cross-cultural ministry with Japanese Americans upon their release from the internment camps, what would that be? That would be, for me, a ministry of reconciliation and restoration, because the American citizens, a lot of them American citizens, were treated terribly, and it would be a ministry of restorative justice. And I think the first steps that I would take in that ministry context would be to I'm sorry, my daughter's laptop is doing all sorts of stuff here. Would be to like keep going away because she's got like texts and things popping in. I'm sorry, I'm using her laptop to make this. Would be to first of all admit to own, to be a witness to what happened, to witness it, and then work towards restoration for what is scary and humiliating and dehumanizing time that would be. But that a lot of my ministry has to do with that, is being a witness, being a witness to somebody's end of life process, being a witness to somebody's fear. And so that's how I would handle that. So thank you so much. And I know this is a little long, but I look forward to this next week. And thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.